Welcome, everyone, for our first episode, Leverage the Podcast, between myself, Dr. Maese,
and I'm Davio Ventouras.
My good friend. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited to teach everybody what the Leverage Podcast means.
It's a very interesting journey that we are embarking upon. Would you not say?
Well, what makes me so excited is I think we should introduce ourselves. And I'd like to introduce you. You are, amongst many things, a preeminent cardiologist who specializes in keeping people thriving and aliving.
Yes.
To coin a phrase. And to have your wisdom and be able to ask you questions and really try to, because I'm on my own journey of cardiac health, to have that resource and then also be able to share it with other people, I think is a very exciting proposition because you really do have some keys that a lot of people don't know. I certainly didn't.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I have gone through my own journey, learned over time with, more than 30 years in medicine. And I'd like to share that and that wisdom and that experience with everyone. That's the way that we should do, right? It's a bit about giving back, but it's also about learning about people. And I think over time we'll have different guests with different stories, different experiences, and hopefully we'll be able to learn from them as well. You yourself have lived in Europe. You went to school here in Dallas, certainly in Greece and in England, back to the United States. That's a journey that has given you an experience that's unique.
Well, I think I'm going to be a good piece of this podcast because I've basically been a glorified tourist. And with that comes a curiosity.
Absolutely.
And I'm really, really, really interested to get deep into the topics that we're going to cover.
Right.
With the principle of leverage. And I'd like to ask you, why did you choose leverage as the name of the podcast?
So for me in this regard, it's about gaining leverage over your health, not letting things happen to you from a health perspective. That is both mental, physical, spiritual, core health, and we can define those down the line, but taking the bull by the horns, being preemptive. I, as you said, like to keep people going longer for longer by being a preventive cardiologist, no pun intended, but pun intended. So my goal is to do risk assessment and see where you are, not in a moralistic fashion or a judgmental fashion, but rather in an objective way, and hopefully point you in the right direction so you can attain your own goals in terms of improving your own health and avoiding downstream complications that, can be catastrophic, especially in a young individual. And I think in today's world, with so much information out there, we're seeing, in fact, an increase in all of the risk factors that cause cardiovascular disease.
What do you mean by that? What are the risk factors that cause cardiovascular disease, and how are they increasing nowadays?
Excellent. The traditional risk factors are hypertension, with about 100 million people in the U.S. having that.
Right.
Diabetes and prediabetes, if you count both of those groups, it's about 88 to 90 million people, many undiagnosed. The third is cholesterol abnormalities. And again, we'll go into each of these later on. The fourth, of course, is smoking, which is making a comeback.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Is that through the vaping phenomenon?
No, it's actual cigarette smoking. Actually, I'm pro-vaping myself for a variety of reasons, given that it does have the nicotine, and as you know, we have nicotine receptors, but it doesn't have the deleterious effects of the 7,000 or so chemicals in the actual cigarette smoke that are so detrimental to our overall health. And of course, increase both cancer risk and cardiovascular events. And also our family history. So knowing our family, knowing where we come from, knowing what gene pool we come from, knowing our own history from our parents, grandparents on both sides is vital to how we need to live our lives.
Does it make a difference then? Do people have different because of their different ancestors, do they have different needs and requirements?
Absolutely.
In other words, if I'm thinking of my diet or my exercise type or my sleep patterns, is there like the best way, or is it different for each individual?
It is different for each genetic group of people. What gene pool do you come from? Are you from Northern European descent? Are you from a Native American population? Are you from an African American type population? Or more Latin American with the mix between Spanish and indigenous populations? Are you from Southeast Asia with the various nuances because each have their own differences?
Oh, really?
Absolutely. And how long ago did your parents or ancestors come to the United States to be exposed to the current American lifestyle? Meaning the diet,
Right.
the type of activities we do, the capitalistic society with its mental stressors that can occur. And lastly, how you choose to live. Because in my book, you need to gain leverage over those risk factors. If you come from a population where you say, well, my dad had a heart attack at 50, my mom had a stent at 55, meaning she had blockages and it was opened up with a cardiac stent. And I have several uncles who died from cardiovascular disease in their 50s or 40s. And I've gained 30, 40 pounds through my 30s, and I smoke a pack a day. I don't exercise. I have a high-pressure job for a financial institution, and I work 12-hour days, 6 days a week. I'm not having fun. And lastly, I eat like crap. I eat 5 or more fast food meals per week. You're probably going to repeat the story of your ancestors. And so the leverage is gained from knowledge, from information, by understanding all of those and then seeking help so you can start working on each.
Because it's not just the information, it's also the implementation.
Rolling it out, correct. And that's where you gain the leverage. And as I like to say, you live hopefully in a free society where you need to eat. That's a given. Second, you have the freedom to choose what you eat. You have the freedom to choose to change how you eat.
Knock on wood.
And your lifestyle at any time. And you can do that by gaining information, by gaining leverage over how you eat. And then you have the freedom to avoid complications that will certainly ensue if you allow those risk factors to continue for more than 10 or 20 years. And lastly, you have the freedom to choose the road of health into your 90s, like in countries and places like the blue zones that live, a certain segment of the population lives to be 100 or more, free of cardiovascular disease and cancer. Or you can choose sickness, chronic disease, and death. So it's akin to a leverage gaining situation for you. And I think in life, it's all about leverage. If you live in certain countries and you want a permit to build a building, oh, well, what are your connections? Who do you know at the office to get the permit?
Right.
You need leverage.
Right.
It's who do you know? Everything's about leverage. Health is no different.
Right.
We're given a genetic template from our parents and prior ancestors, and we can only screw it up through an adverse lifestyle.
Well, we have to, it's easier if we live in a culture, in a location where the indigenous food, the culture of the time is what's healthy for us.
Absolutely, but that is not the case.
Right, for most of us.
And the more we deviate from the way our ancestors ate and lived, the quicker we become sick. So let's say Native American individual, hunter-gatherer, for the last 10,000 years, had a healthy lifestyle, meaning they exercised every day.
Right.
They ate minimal animal meats, very rarely. They ate
I thought they lived on buffalo alone.
Oh, no, that's a myth. That was maybe twice a year for a couple of weeks. Most of the time, they were eating what they found in the grasslands. Natural berries, nuts, fish, small game, and fruit here and there where they found it. They would follow the sun and go to where the food supply was.
Right.
In fact,
There was a nomadic lifestyle.
correct. And the number one type cause of death was war. Some infectious diseases, of course, but war mostly. There was fresh drinking water wherever they went. There was no pollution to speak thereof. The environment was, for the most part, pristine.
Yes, but how high was their stock market?
Yes, exactly. Back to the mental health issues. So if you give them sugar ad libitum, which is a fancy way of saying as much as you want, you're going to have a liver that has not adapted over the last 200 years. A Northern European society that lived within the confines of an agricultural revolution by domesticating grains like wheat, sometimes soy, and animals, cows, pigs, and others, sheep, and they were eating animal fats 12 months a year and lots of sugar in those grains, their liver adapted over the last 10,000 years. So faced with the current diets.
So they can eat the same diet as their friend, and their friend is killing himself.
Correct.
And they're just surviving.
Yes, and so you may have someone from Western European, Northern European gene pool that can become obese and have perfect blood sugar. In other words, no diabetes or prediabetes, perfect blood pressure, and perfect cholesterol levels, despite the fact that they may be obese.
I think we know someone that was like that up until recently.
Yes. Versus a Native American or a Latin American with more indigenous genes like myself, that if I gain 10 pounds, I'm a pre-diabetic and I'm a borderline hypertensive and have dyslipidemia with high triglycerides, low HDL, and mildly elevated LDL cholesterol.
I think it's impressive how with those risk factors that you keep yourself so healthy. I mean, you have the leverage because you know about it. And I think that's what's really helped me on my journey, which I think I should share a little bit.
Yes.
Well, about how I came into your care.
Yes.
That's the only way to put it.
But voluntarily.
Of course.
And that's key. You did an analysis and you said, I need help.
You did the analysis.
Because I called you some derogatory things?
No, not that.
I see. It was the erectile dysfunction that did it.
I've never had that. No,
Okay.
I just went in for a checkup. You said I needed a checkup, and then
Do we need a disclaimer here? Okay.
Yes,
of course.
You checked it. You checked up on me, and you looked, and you said, "Hey, by the way, you're at risk for a heart attack."
You have some very good genetics that you inherited. You do.
I'm agree.
There's one or two minor areas, but I see people again from certain genetic backgrounds who appear healthy on the outside,
Right.
but they're not. Their metabolism is completely disheveled because they probably have had the wrong diet for some years. And this takes 10, 20 years to ensue. So this is why it's so difficult to do research in nutrition, because the diseases that ensue, what are called metabolic syndrome, the ones I mentioned, prediabetes, diabetes,
Right.
hypertension,
Right. Sleep apnea,
visceral obesity, and dyslipidemias, and then other complications of obesity that can be like sleep apnea and sleep disturbances, and others, depression, anxiety, orthopedic issues. They take years. They may take 20 years. The average is about 18 to 22 years in that range to go from a bad diet to diabetes on average. In some people, it comes a little sooner, where they develop the prediabetes and borderline hypertension earlier than the 18 to 20 years.
and that's all down to genetics.
Genetics, yes. So we know that obesity has a strong genetic component. There are all kinds of syndromes that we will do a whole segment on that at some point, where there's one gene that's deficient, that has been omitted or mutated, and there are others that are polygenic. So,
And by polygenic,
multiple genes play a role. So there are about 250 genes that play a role in obesity. They're called the FTO genes on multiple chromosomes, but it's really the FTO gene is chromosome 16. So these are issues that we all have to come to terms with and gain leverage over them. For example, if I know I have a predisposition for diabetes or prediabetes, if I gain 10 pounds, then I've got to know which sugars which starches are going to increase my insulin level and cause what is called insulin resistance and eventually result in all of the complications that are caused by prediabetes and diabetes.
So people generating too much insulin is what causes the problems?
It's not 100% established, but it appears that an excess of the wrong sugars and some fats, but mostly sugars, starts to trigger in genetically predisposed individuals. Earlier, if you have multiple genes that are against you, and later in those that have more favorable gene pool, descendants. So it's a question of depositing long-chain fatty acids inside the liver cells, and those through a circuitous route inside each liver cell, or inside each muscle cell, or inside each kidney cell, or inside each pancreatic cell, and others prevent the insulin from engaging with the receptor. So the pancreas increases insulin.
So the fat is
inside.
blocking the insulin.
Yes.
And that makes you produce too much insulin. So
Correct.
your body's having to work harder to just stay in place.
The pancreas is working full time at an excess level. So you have hyperinsulinemia.
And that increases chances for cancer.
Heart attacks, strokes.
Because when you increase your metabolism like that, it just increases the more, it's like a math equation.
More inflammation.
The more times it happens, the more times you roll the dice, eventually one's going to spin off.
Over a period of 20 years.
Right.
Yes. So this is why nutrition research is very difficult, because it's difficult to control it and say, I'm going to take 2,000 people and feed them 50% of their calories from refined sugar. Sodas.
Apps might help with that.
Yes, but those are, that's difficult to control it, because you have to depend on people being honorable and
well, aren't there going to be
eventually perhaps
where you can,
implantable devices to see what the impact of what you're eating is doing? And we have right now continuous glucose monitors. There are several on the market that we cardiologists use to help people control their sugar, because they're able to see the impact of what they just ate on their sugar over the next 10, 20, 30, 60 minutes. So you can teach them to back off the ones that cause a high sugar level, which are the ones that are causing the very high insulin level. The higher your insulin, the more weight you gain. The higher the insulin, the more downstream inflammation, which promotes the buildup of plaque inside the wall of your arteries. Intracerebral arteries, in other words, the carotids,
that's
the
how you
coronaries.
get strokes. That's how you get strokes and
Correct.
heart attacks.
Correct. And lower extremities.
So basically, the idea is to keep the fluids going through you flowing without fatty buildups.
The idea is to adopt the right lifestyle that includes activity levels. The American Heart Association recommends 30 minutes or more 5 times a week, and the right diet for your age, your gene pool, and by age, I mean the decade of life you're in, because when you're 20s, you can eat a certain way, but not in your 40s or 50s.
That's a topic I really want to cover as we go along, is the difference in age.
Yes.
Because as somebody who looks way older than he is, but feels even older than that
at times, but you can improve on that. But by altering the proteins around your genes, that's called your epigenetics. Those proteins are influenced by our environment and what we do, our mental strength, our physical activity, and our nutrition. And so those proteins, if you trigger the right changes, are adjacent to your DNA. And so they're able to tell the DNA what genes to upregulate and which ones to downregulate in your favor.
So it's a feedback. It's not a set in stone.
No, it's not set in stone.
It's like choices.
And that's the journey you're on. By improving your lifestyle, you're going to actually prevent the aging process as per the path you were on previously, and you're going to go on the path you were meant to go on. It's as if someone smoked for 10 years, a pack a day, they quit. Well, 3-5 years later, many of those people will have improved their lung function, their cardiovascular function, to the point as if they never smoked.
So it is possible, though.
Yes, by changing your epigenetics, that is the proteins around your DNA that influence the DNA. so you can favorably improve your life by improving your lifestyle, improve your DNA expression.
How come most people talk about calories in, calories are out, and meanwhile you're talking about epigenetics? It
Yes.
seems like they're playing checkers and you're playing chess. Tell me the disconnect there, the calorie idea, because I know a lot of people that are very serious about getting in shape
Right.
and try really hard for years
Yes.
and do all kinds of insane methods, just whatever the new fad is, cycling.
Yes.
What's the old joke? How are cycling and CrossFit the same?
And it's not.
Well, they're both the best exercise you ever did, and then you get horribly injured.
But it depends on the person, because we all have exercises that are maybe optimal for you, but not optimal for a different person, depending on the
Right.
type of muscles you have,
Right.
how you burn sugars, accessing visceral triglycerides, which is a cleaner form of energy to burn. It gives 1 gram of fat, basically 9 kilocalories, versus glucose, which is only 4 kilocalories of energy. And so back to your point from a second ago, it's checkers, chess. So
Right.
it's a slightly different pathway or paradigm.
Paradigm is the
So
word.
when a long time ago, back 70 years ago or so, in the 50s or so, when President Eisenhower had a heart attack, which was approximately on a Friday afternoon, September 23rd,
I like how you can just pull that.
1955.
Approximately.
He was playing golf. He started having a discomfort in the upper part of the abdomen, lower part of the chest, so epigastric discomfort. That on the golf course in Denver, he attributed to a hamburger he had eaten for lunch. So he went to the guest house where he was staying, and the pain returned 10 p.m. It got worse at 2 a.m. The wife, Mamie Eisenhower, called the family doctor, who was there at 3 a.m. I believe he got some morphine for the pain,
Good.
which was the right thing to do. In those times, we didn't have the same techniques and knowledge as now. So at the time, the conventional wisdom was, you rest a heart attack. Rest, Mr. President. Well, he kept having little bouts of chest pain to the point that they said, let's do an EKG. And that was at 1 p.m. the following day,
Right.
right? Many hours.
Right.
So by the time he did the EKG, he had a large anterior myocardial infarction.
Which for the
see-
tourist is
A large heart attack on the anterior wall of the heart. This is the heart.
and the heart attack is caused by the blood flow stopped.
Yes, in essence, he had
A blockage?
plaques of cholesterol inside the lumen, and one of them broke off. Maybe he also had other risk factors, hypertension, maybe cholesterol issues. I believe he was a smoker for some time. So I don't know about his family history. So he had other risk factors. He was a little heavy set, as I recall, from watching him on film. And he was in his mid-60s, I believe. And he was out in the cold wind playing golf in late September in Denver. It's a cool day. We know that the cold tends to vasoconstrict. He probably broke a plaque, and that caused a cascade of events that built a blood clot, interrupting the blood flow to the mid and distal portion of the anterior wall. So he had an anterior myocardial infarction,
Okay.
anterior heart attack. The mortality for that was 30 to 40% at the time in the 1950s. 30 to 40%. He's lucky to have survived. So the interventions that were given to him, once they realized he had a heart attack, because it was already established.
Right.
Because after 3 to 6 hours, if you don't reopen that vessel,
It dies.
then that part is going to die. You're going to have what is called transmural fibrosis, or part of the wall is going to become fibrosed and remodeled. So it's not going to be able to pump blood. And so what happened? At that afternoon, they took him to the hospital, but they made him walk down the stairs from the house to the hospital. And then they called him preeminent doctor in the country, Dr. White, Paul Dudley White, from Mass General, I believe, in Boston, Harvard-affiliated hospital. And he was a very wise doctor with a lot of experience who came to see the president. I believe Paul Dudley White was on his way to a dinner with his wife when I think the Attorney General called him and said, you need to come. The president's having a heart attack. So they flew him to Denver and was able to see the president. And then, with great wisdom, I must say, was able to present the case to the journalists who were hungry for information. Why? Because in February of 1919, the president, Woodrow Wilson, had N1H1 infection, the Spanish flu, and became very ill. And shortly thereafter, he had a stroke. And the encephalitis induced, the thinking goes, and there are some books written about this, caused him to change his negotiation tactic at the Versailles Conference in detriment to Europe, in detriment
because of
to
that.
Germany. I think it caused a bit of, I'm going to say, I don't want to use the word dementia. I want to say that the virus caused encephalitis, and it was known to do so, causing him to have impaired expressive and receptive
As he was
prefrontal
he was negotiating.
Yes, and made a rash decision about allowing the reparations when the top economists in the world, Maynard Keynes, had argued that Germany should not be given such penalties.
Right.
That it would be bad for the world for many reasons.
Right. Which, of course, it was.
Yes, and that it would create problems. And he was correct and was very upset with our president. But it was probably not his fault. I think it was a result of the viral infection. So that had been kept hidden from the press.
Right.
So fast forward, 1955.
Eisenhower.
The journalists are saying, we need transparency here. And the chief of staff knew he had been having mini heart attacks already, President Eisenhower. Already. In the months.
What's a mini heart attack? Describe.
Chest pain, highly suggestive, chest pressure radiating towards the arm, neck, associated with sometimes breaking out a cold sweat, nausea, vomiting, waxing and waning. That's a fancy way of saying it reaches a peak in 3 to 5 minutes, then it goes away. Reaches a peak and goes away. Then it would do an EKG, and he would have what are called ST segment depressions. So he never had the full transmural heart attack. So he would choke off his blood supply for a little bit, and then his own fibrinolytic system, in other words, his own blood clot dissolving system, would recanalize the blood vessel. But this time, in Denver, on the golf course, he had the real McCoy, and that matured. And so Paul Dudley White was basically able to say, he has survived, he's going to be fine, and his heart will recover within 2 weeks, which, of course, now in retrospect, we know that that is not quite the case.
Right.
But the president did live, did win another election, and was president for 4 more years. But I believe he was kept on a strict diet and to optimize his lifestyle. So the country, the world gained leverage because it was the first time someone had heard of a president having a heart attack
and surviving.
Right.
And
then surviving another 4 years.
Right.
So that started the saturated fat and red meat is the problem in the American diet.
That did.
That event is the one that kicked up tremendously why the recommendations for the next half century were to lower fat consumption as the culprit with no data. No data.
So I think that's going to be an exciting podcast to get into.
I think we should go into the sugar, how that came to be, and visit the history. Again, we go to leverage. Why? Because
who had the leverage in that situation?
The sugar lobbies, the sugar industry, the International Sugar Federation, and the other. Because the country and the world went in a direction towards low fat that was never actually quite proved, marginally at best.
Well, that'll be exciting to talk about in our next podcast. So
all of us has to gain leverage of our health. We need to know who we are.
I'm very excited to watch this podcast unfold. I'm excited that we had this first podcast. I hope everybody enjoyed.
And if you don't get the leverage, you're going to have erectile dysfunction, as you well know.
Well, as you well know, the word leverage is a Greek word.
Yes, it is.
And you've been talking a lot about ancestors. So, as you know, my ancestors are Greek. So I love how the podcast brings it back.
To the Greek?
Well, as you know, my grandfather was also a doctor. So I always used to joke, he knew every way to die and he did none of them.
Interesting.
Well, you remind me of him
because,
and I think
I'll take that as a compliment.
I think as the listeners go through the journey of this podcast, they are also going to learn that kind of wisdom where they can
implement it
and live as long as possible and as healthy as possible.
Because that's the key. It's how you live. It's not just living long. It's how you take advantage of those years by maintaining cognitive health, mental health, physical health, and hopefully core health. And we can delve into what that is. Got it?
I'm excited. The thing that I like to think about is the longer and the more that you understand it, the easier it is to implement. And
you feel better. So it's a self-reinforcement.
Well, and the other side of that is, and what you told me and what really helped me get serious, is it's not just that you die early by having bad cardiac health. It's the years of suffering before death.
And agree. It's a miserable way to live.
And so there's a choice. Miserable suffering and then painful early death.
Or gain leverage, acquire knowledge, and live healthy and long. And use that wisdom to pass on to others.
All right, perfect.
Okay, until next time, my friend.
Great.
Bye.